In 1815, the German-speaking territories of Central Europe were not a unified nation, but a complex mosaic of states, principalities, duchies, free cities, and ecclesiastical territories. The collapse of the Holy Roman Empire in 1806 had left a vacuum. Under the pressure of Napoleon's military campaigns, many German rulers had either aligned with or been coerced into supporting the French system. The ancien regime structures had been shaken. The defeat necessitated the imposition Ophion required a new polo to be initiated, and that laid the groundwork for the story of Germany. Although, in its earliest phase, fragmentation would define the landscape. The preamble to 1815 included years of turmoil. Prussia, for example, had suffered devastating defeats by French armies, losing territory in the Treaty of Tilsit, 1807. Prussian reforms under Freiherr von Stein and Karl August von Hardenberg from 1807 to around 1812 abolished serfdom, reorganized provincial administration, restructured tax systems, and introduced municipal self-government in part. These reforms strengthened Prussia's internal structure, even though French dominance limited its external power until 1813–14. In other German states, French-imposed reforms varied. Some secularized church lands, dissolved ecclesiastical principalities, reorganized legal codes, and imposed conscription. These changes had lasting institutional effects, weakening traditional intermediaries and binding elites to the modernizing state. At the Congress of Vienna, the major powers, Austria, Prussia, Russia, Britain, and to a lesser extent France, negotiated the reshaping of Europe. From September 1814 onward, diplomats such as Prince Clemens von Metternich, Austria, Karl von Metternich's Austrian delegation, and Prussian statesmen such as Hardenberg sought to preserve stability and prevent revolutionary resurgence. Within Germany's context, Austria aimed to maintain a leading ceremonial and political role, restoring conservative order and suppressing liberal upheaval. Prussia, having lost territory but possessing a reformed internal structure, sought compensation and status. Between them, the smaller states negotiated survival, territorial adjustment, and supremacy. The result was the establishment of the German Confederation Deutscher Bund. Officially organized in June 1815, it comprised 39 states. Membership included Austria, Prussia, Bavaria, Saxony, Württemberg, Baden, Hanover, Hesse, Mecklenburg-Schwerin, Mecklenburg-Strelitz, and smaller duchies such as Anhalt, Lippe, Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, Saxe-Weimar, Brunswick, and many principalities. Free cities like Frankfurt, Hamburg, Bremen, and Lübeck joined as well. Each state retained its own governance, constitution, if any, legal system, military forces, and diplomatic authority, except in matters explicitly delegated to the Confederation. In the Confederation, Austria held the presidency of the Diet, Bundestag, in Frankfurt. The Diet convened delegates from all member states. The Bundestag had no permanent executive or army of its own. Decisions required consensus or qualified majorities, and each state was represented by its own vote. The Confederation had limited competence. It could mediate disputes, propose military cooperation, regulate some interstate issues, and guarantee internal order, but it could not enforce taxation or compel military contributions in many circumstances. All state sovereignties remained intact. Smaller states frequently negotiated bilateral agreements, alliances, or insurance treaties with Austria or Prussia. At this time, The balance of power within Germany hinged on the dual rivalry of Austria and Prussia. Austria, holding a large multi-ethnic empire, had its capital in Vienna, and its realm extended well beyond the German sphere. Its interest in Germany was part of a broader conservative approach, preserving the monarchical order in Central Europe. Prussia, in contrast, increasingly viewed German consolidation as central to its strategic ambition. Prussia's territory, extending from the Rhineland through Brandenburg, included scattered enclaves. Its reforms made it a more competitive institutionally and administratively. In German affairs, the rivalry was latent in the Confederation. Austrian ministers often sought to block Prussian initiatives. Prussia pushed for economic or administrative cooperation among smaller states. The political map remained highly fragmented in 1815. Some states were absolute monarchies: Bavaria, Württemberg, many duchies. Others had constitutions or advisory assemblies. Few allowed real liberal representation. Many rulers enforced press censorship, police surveillance, and limits on public assembly. Liberal and nationalist sentiment was cautiously suppressed. The Carlsbad Decrees, 1819, adopted by the Confederation under Austrian influence, were a binding interdiction throughout member states. The decrees banned student organizations, imposed press censorship, required state control over universities, and empowered governments to root out liberal agitation. The decrees restricted political expression and confined intellectuals to tightly monitored spaces. Nevertheless, private correspondence, underground journals, and trans-state networks carried ideas of reform and national unity forward. Economically, these decades exhibited substantial diversity. Many states clung to agrarian economies, guild restrictions, fragmented landholdings, and internal tariffs. Peasants and smaller landholders faced obligations, tithes, and local dues. Urban centers, Leipzig, Dresden, Nuremberg, Frankfurt, Cologne, hosted merchants, artisans, tradesmen, and small industries. The Rhine and the Danube, plus river networks such as the Main, provided trade routes, but navigability and infrastructure remained limited. Internal customs barriers and state monopolies impeded commerce. Each state often operated its own customs house, currency, weights, and measurement systems. For merchants crossing multiple German borders, the cost and complexity were high. These conditions delayed large-scale industrialization. Yet, technological and infrastructural modernization crept forward. In the 1820s, some states began investing in roads, canals, and local improvements. The Ruhr and Silesian coal fields within Prussia became more significant. The textile industry in Saxony, mechanical workshops in Württemberg, and metalworking in southwestern Germany began modest growth. These pockets of industrial and commercial expansion planted seeds for deeper interconnectivity. Nevertheless, the absence of coordinated railroads or a unified economic policy hampered scaling. In the cultural sphere, the idea of Germanness advanced slowly but steadily. Intellectuals debated the meaning of nationality, language, identity, and statehood. Figures such as Johann Gottlieb Fichte, 1762–1814, had earlier argued for a German national spirit. His addresses to the German nation remained influential. Ernst Moritz Arndt, 1769–1860, wrote patriotic and nationalist tracts. Friedrich Ludwig John, known as Turnvater John, promoted physical education and German unity through gymnastic societies, Turnverein. In the 1810s and 1820s, linking physical culture to national health. The Wartburg Festival of October 1817, on the 300th anniversary of Luther's 95 Theses, drew students and nationalists to meet at Wartburg Castle. They burned conservative literature and protested censorship. The event signaled the symbolic importance of national identity. Student associations, Burschenschaften, emerged in the 1820s and 1830s at universities in Jena, Göttingen, Heidelberg, and elsewhere. They enabled student communication across state lines, embraced nationalist and liberal agendas, and published political pamphlets. Though suppressed by conservative governments, these organizations kept networks alive. Poets, historians, philologists, and romantic authors like the Brothers Grimm engaged themes of folklore, language, shared heritage, and a common German past, fostering a sense of cultural unity before political unity. Across social strata, elites and bourgeoisie differed in outlook. The commercial bourgeoisie, merchants, industrialists, professionals, had economic incentives for freer trade, legal uniformity, and improved infrastructure. Their demands included the removal of internal trade barriers, standardized property law, freer navigation of rivers, and a predictable legal environment. Many of these reformist impulses remained local, informal, and incremental due to political suppression. Rural populations, peasantry, and smallholders often remained tied to traditional obligations. Their interest in national politics was minimal and indirect. Military structures in 1815 varied. Austria maintained a large, well-established imperial army. Prussia's military had been reformed after defeats and now possessed a better organizational structure, reserve systems, and staff reforms. Diplomatic and interstate relations operated through a dense web of treaties, matrimonial alliances, dynastic networks, and mutual defense pacts. Many German states looked to Austria for protection against external threats or disturbances. Others found Prussia a counterbalance. Some joined in confederated institutions, others negotiated bilateral arrangements. Diplomats and ministries often coordinated with major powers beyond Germany, France, Russia, Britain, seeking security guarantees or territorial compensation. Between 1815 and the early 1820s, incremental events shaped this fragmented terrain. In 1816 to 17, crop failures, rising grain prices, and economic distress triggered local unrest in parts of Germany. Governments responded with suppression. In 1818, the Bavarian constitution was revised to include a limited assembly, Ständeversammlung, and a system of estates, though still under monarchical control. In 1819, Clemens von Metternich and Austrian influence led the Confederation to adopt the Carlsbad Decrees, which curbed university freedom, the press, and student societies across German states. By 1820, constitutional movements in states like Württemberg, Baden, and Hesse met with pushback and repeal. In 1823, a Prussian internal customs union, Vorläufer of Zollverein, began coordinating trade among several states. By 1825, economic distress, censorship, and resurging liberal networks continued quietly, while dynastic governments reasserted control. Following the political reorganization of 1815 and the establishment of the German Confederation, the German states faced not only a fragmented political landscape, but also a highly disjointed economic environment. Each state maintained its own currency, tariff system, and regulatory regime. Internal tariffs, coinage inconsistencies, and a multiplicity of measurement standards created considerable barriers to trade. Merchants, artisans, and farmers encountered difficulties in transporting goods across borders, as customs duties, tolls, and inconsistent commercial regulations added complexity and cost to virtually every transaction. In the aftermath of the Napoleonic Wars, economic disruption was widespread. Regions had been exposed to conscription, requisitioning, and the destruction associated with conflict. Prussia, Saxony, Bavaria, and other states had suffered significant damage to infrastructure, agriculture, and industry. In addition, the agricultural sector faced recurrent difficulties, including poor harvests, fluctuating grain prices, and the transition from feudal obligations toward more modern land tenancy systems. Many peasants were still tied to manorial structures, limiting labor mobility and the potential for industrial labor development. Urban populations remained relatively small, and cities struggled with infrastructure to support commercial expansion, including marketplaces, warehouses, and river or road transport systems. Prussia emerged as the most proactive state in attempting to address these challenges. The administration of Freiherr von Stein and Karl August von Hardenberg, initiated during the Napoleonic period, had already instituted reforms in taxation, municipal government, and the legal system, establishing the foundations for more effective state-directed economic policies. After 1815, Prussia consolidated these reforms, centralizing economic oversight and standardizing practices where possible within its territories. Prussia's industrial regions, including the Rhineland and Silesia, gradually recovered, with small textile and mining operations resuming production. Across southern and central Germany, economic development was uneven. Bavaria, Baden, Württemberg, and other mid-sized states maintained largely agrarian economies with localized craft and textile industries. In the north, Hanover, Hesse, and the smaller northern duchies possessed merchant classes capable of regional trade but constrained by internal tariffs. Austria, while outside the later Zollverein, maintained substantial economic control in its Austrian lands and exerted influence in southern Germany. Yet centralized economic planning across the Confederation was impossible due to the weak authority of the Bundestag and the preservation of state sovereignty. The need for economic cohesion was recognized by political leaders and the merchant classes alike. The Zollverein, or customs union, arose from these circumstances. The initial discussions for a customs union began in the late 1820s, with Prussia advocating for a unified system that would eliminate internal tariffs, standardize weights and measures, and harmonize currency exchange where feasible. Smaller states were receptive insofar as economic benefits could be achieved without surrendering political autonomy. Austria, conversely, declined participation due to concerns that Prussia would dominate the Union and thereby expand its influence over German economic and political affairs. By 1834, these negotiations culminated in the formal establishment of the Zollverein. The initial union included Prussia and several smaller northern and western states. Its objectives were to eliminate internal customs duties between members, standardize tolls for external trade, and facilitate smoother commercial operations across state borders. The Zollverein did not, however, directly interfere with local laws, taxation, or political sovereignty, allowing each state to retain formal independence. It was, therefore, a mechanism of economic integration without political centralization. Over time, additional states joined the Union, increasing its reach and effectiveness. By the late 1830s, the Zollverein encompassed most German states north of the main river, though Austria remained consistently outside the framework. The Zollverein produced several significant effects. Economically, it reduced transaction costs for merchants, facilitated larger markets, and encouraged specialization in production. Industrial producers could sell across state borders without repetitive customs duties, providing the stimulus for textile manufacturing in Saxony, metalworking in Prussia and Bavaria, and coal mining in Silesia and the Ruhr. Agricultural producers, particularly grain farmers, benefited from expanded markets for their produce. Banking and commercial networks became more interconnected, with financial instruments and bills of exchange able to circulate more freely within the Union's territory. Political implications followed naturally. Prussia, as the initiator and primary administrator of the Zollverein, enhanced its prestige and influence among member states. While still respecting formal sovereignty, Prussia effectively became the economic leader of northern and central Germany. Smaller states benefited economically from participation but increasingly relied on Prussia for coordination in trade, infrastructure, and industrial development. The Zollverein demonstrated the principle that economic unity could precede political unity, providing a model for future integration that would ultimately facilitate the unification of Germany. During this period, Austria observed these developments with caution. Austrian policymakers feared that Prussian dominance in the Zollverein would translate into political influence. Austria's exclusion allowed it to maintain economic independence, but isolated it from the growing interstate market that would connect northern and central German economies. This division also reinforced the dualism that characterized German politics in the mid-19th century: Austria's traditional leadership versus Prussia's emerging power, facilitated by economic and administrative reforms. Internal state reforms accompanied economic developments. Many smaller German states undertook administrative modernization to accommodate Zollverein membership and improve internal governance. Measurement systems, coinage, and commercial codes were partially standardized to meet Union requirements. Bureaucratic structures were strengthened, often drawing on Napoleonic precedents, and legal reforms improved predictability for business and commerce. Local magistrates and customs officials gained clearer responsibilities, reducing corruption and improving enforcement. Infrastructure investments, particularly in roads and river navigation, were increasingly tied to facilitating trade under the Zollverein. Socioeconomic changes were also notable. As markets expanded, merchant classes and urban populations grew in influence. Skilled artisans found new opportunities in larger markets, while industrial entrepreneurs in textiles, metallurgy, and mining increasingly depended on Prussian administrative support. Urban labor remained largely limited in scale, but nascent factory systems began to emerge in Prussia and Saxony. Guilds continued to regulate production in many towns, but were gradually being supplemented or circumvented by emerging industrial enterprises. Rural populations experienced indirect effects, as greater access to distant markets allowed for incremental improvement in agricultural income, though subsistence farming and traditional obligations remained widespread. Transportation improvements, though modest, supported this economic cohesion. River navigation on the Rhine, Main, Elbe, and Danube became increasingly important for bulk trade. Canals were constructed in certain regions, including the Ludwig Canal linking the Main and Danube, facilitating east-west commerce. Road networks improved in Prussia and Bavaria, partly to integrate Zollverein economic objectives with local administration. These improvements reduced costs, transit times, and regional disparities, and encouraged the mobility of labor and goods. Intellectual and political discussion about economic integration accompanied these practical developments. Economists, legal theorists, and political thinkers debated the benefits of tariffs, free trade, and industrial growth. Figures such as Friedrich List advocated for economic nationalism, emphasizing that German states needed internal cohesion to compete internationally. List proposed protective tariffs for nascent industries and investment in transportation infrastructure. His arguments influenced policymakers, particularly in Prussia, and reinforced the idea that economic unification could serve as a precursor to political unification. Despite progress, internal political opposition remained. Conservative elites in some smaller states resisted changes that could reduce their influence or threaten established local privileges. Feudal obligations, taxation rights, and municipal autonomy sometimes clashed with the economic logic of the Zollverein. Moreover, Austria's non-participation maintained an alternative center of influence for conservative politics. The dual economic-political system produced a complex landscape in which Prussia's ascendancy depended on careful negotiation and incremental integration. By the early 1830s, the economic framework established under the Zollverein had achieved measurable results. Trade volume increased among member states, industrial output rose, and regional interdependence deepened. Prussia's leadership was clearly recognized, and the state's administrative capacity allowed it to manage interstate economic policy effectively. Smaller states increasingly oriented their policies to align with the Zollverein, adopting compatible measures in taxation, regulation, and infrastructure investment. In addition to trade, standardized weights, measures, and currencies simplified commercial transactions. This reduced transaction errors, fraud, and disputes, improving confidence among merchants and investors. Banking institutions and insurance mechanisms began to operate more effectively across borders, providing financial security for larger commercial operations. Agricultural producers responded to new markets by diversifying crops, improving efficiency, and integrating with regional commercial networks. Urban centers developed more complex commercial organizations, including guild-supported workshops, joint stock enterprises, and local chambers of commerce, laying foundations for industrial expansion. The Zollverein also provided a forum for technical and administrative exchange among member states. Officials met to coordinate customs enforcement, standardization, and dispute resolution. Legal codes for commerce were studied and partially harmonized, allowing smoother interactions across state borders. Even in the absence of a unified central government, this quasi-federal economic framework demonstrated that states could operate collectively on practical matters without relinquishing sovereignty. In the period following the establishment of the German Confederation and the early economic unification through the Zollverein, the German states experienced growing political, social, and intellectual currents that challenged the conservative order. While the Confederation had preserved state sovereignty and stability, it had not resolved the underlying tensions arising from economic modernization, cultural awakening, and political aspirations. These tensions coalesced in the revolutionary movements of 1848, which represented the first substantial attempt to establish a unified, constitutional Germany. The origins of liberal nationalism in Germany were both ideological and practical. Intellectuals, scholars, and students had for decades articulated the concept of a German nation-state, rooted in shared language, culture, and historical experience. Philosophers and writers such as Johann Gottlieb Fichte, Ernst Moritz Arndt, and Friedrich Ludwig John emphasized German identity, national cohesion, and civic virtue. Fichte's addresses to the German nation, 1807 to 1808, articulated the idea that the German people possessed a distinct spirit and moral duty, which could only be realized within a unified polity. Arndt and John extended these ideas into popular discourse, advocating for resistance to foreign domination and the cultivation of national consciousness through education, civic engagement, and cultural practice. By the 1830s, economic developments, particularly under the Zollverein, had begun to connect northern and central German states. Improved trade networks, standardization of currency and measures, and industrial growth created a more interconnected society. Urban centers expanded, providing venues for discussion, debate, and the dissemination of ideas. The mercantile bourgeoisie and emerging professional classes became increasingly vocal in their desire for constitutional government, representative institutions, legal equality, and codified civil liberties. In smaller towns and cities, guilds, local assemblies, and civic organizations began to advocate for reform, often encountering resistance from entrenched aristocratic and monarchical authority. Political developments in the 1830s and 1840s provided further context for revolutionary activity. Across Europe, a series of liberal and nationalist uprisings, from the Belgian Revolution of 1830 to uprisings in Italy and Poland, demonstrated the possibilities for challenging autocratic rule. Within the German Confederation, these movements influenced intellectuals and reformists who saw parallels between broader European struggles and the fragmented German political landscape. The failure of local uprisings, such as those in Baden, Württemberg, and other southwestern states, demonstrated both the desire for change and the formidable resistance of established monarchies. In 1848, political conditions converged to produce a widespread revolutionary wave. Economic hardship, particularly following the potato blight of 1846 to 1847, increased public discontent. Industrialization had begun to displace traditional labor, creating urban working-class grievances, while rural populations suffered food scarcity and high prices. Political repression, entrenched censorship, and a lack of representation further fueled dissatisfaction. Intellectuals, students, and middle-class reformists organized petitions, assemblies, and public demonstrations demanding liberal reforms, civil liberties, and constitutional governance. The revolutionary events began in France in February 1848, where the overthrow of King Louis Philippe inspired liberal movements across Europe. In the German states, demonstrations and uprisings rapidly spread. Workers, students, artisans, and parts of the middle class mobilized, demanding freedom of the press, assembly, and association, along with constitutional government and the unification of Germany. Urban centers such as Berlin, Vienna, Munich, Frankfurt, and Dresden became focal points for demonstrations, often resulting in confrontations with local authorities. Though initially decentralized, The movement quickly coalesced around shared political objectives: constitutional reform, national unity, and civil rights. In May 1848, the Frankfurt Assembly, Frankfurter Nationalversammlung, convened as the first attempt to create a unified German state under a liberal constitution. Delegates were elected from various German states, representing urban constituencies, intellectuals, and some regional elites. The assembly met in the Paulskirche in Frankfurt, symbolically central and politically neutral. Its composition included professionals, academics, and members of the emerging bourgeoisie, but largely excluded representatives from traditional aristocratic elites, military leadership, and rural constituencies. Despite its limitations, the assembly represented a historic experiment, a deliberative body attempting to reconcile the interests of multiple sovereign states while producing a framework for national unification. The assembly undertook detailed discussions regarding constitutional structure, suffrage, civil liberties, the monarchy, and the military. A central debate concerned whether the future Germany should follow the Klein-Deutschland or Großdeutschland model. The Klein-Deutschland solution proposed a unified Germany under Prussian leadership, excluding Austria. The Großdeutschland solution proposed including Austria under Habsburg leadership, but this model posed difficulties due to Austria's multi-ethnic empire and the political dominance of non-German regions. Delegates also debated whether the state should be a monarchy, a constitutional monarchy, or a republic, and the extent of parliamentary authority relative to executive powers. Economic regulation, customs, and fiscal authority were also considered, reflecting the experiences of the Zollverein and the practical challenges of integrating diverse economies. By March and April of 1849, the Frankfurt Assembly had drafted a constitution proposing a hereditary monarchy for a united Germany. The proposed German state would maintain a parliamentary system, codified civil rights, and a limited executive with significant legislative oversight. The assembly offered the crown to King Frederick William IV of Prussia, seeking a compromise between liberal aspirations and traditional monarchical legitimacy. Frederick William IV, however, declined the offer, rejecting a crown from the gutter, meaning that he would not accept authority derived from a popularly elected assembly rather than from dynastic succession. His refusal underscored the limitations of liberal constitutionalism when confronting entrenched dynastic power and revealed the centrality of Prussian authority in any practical unification effort. The failure of the 1848 revolutions and the Frankfurt Assembly had multiple consequences. Across the German states, revolutionary forces were gradually suppressed. Local uprisings in Saxony, Baden, Hesse, and other states were crushed by military intervention, often under the leadership of loyalist forces coordinated with the Confederation's provisions. Intellectuals, students, and bourgeois reformers faced arrests, exile, or professional marginalization. Many moderate delegates from the Frankfurt Assembly retreated into private life or regional politics, while more radical proponents emigrated, particularly to the United States, establishing networks among the German diaspora. Despite this suppression, nationalist sentiment and demands for constitutional governance persisted, forming an ideological foundation for future political developments. During this period, regional differences shaped both the revolutionary experience and the potential for unification. Northern German states, particularly Prussia, had more robust administrative and military structures capable of resisting radical upheaval. Southern German states, including Bavaria, Württemberg, and Baden experienced more intense revolutionary activity due to economic stress, smaller professional classes, and geographic proximity to revolutionary France. Austria's indirect influence through the Confederation provided coordination for suppression, illustrating the conservative axis of German politics and practice. Nevertheless, the failures of 1848 demonstrated the emerging political consciousness among urban and rural populations, highlighting the potential for integration when combined with administrative capacity and military strength. Economic considerations continued to influence political movements. The success of the Zollverein in increasing trade and standardizing commerce had not been accompanied by corresponding political reform, creating tension between economic interdependence and political fragmentation. Merchants and industrialists increasingly favored Prussia's leadership, recognizing that its administrative and infrastructural capabilities could facilitate broader economic integration. Conversely, liberal activists criticized the conservative monopolization of political power, advocating for constitutional guarantees and parliamentary oversight to ensure equitable participation in economic development. The revolutionary wave of 1848 also impacted intellectual discourse, legal reform, and civil administration. Universities remained centers of nationalist and liberal thought, though heavily monitored by state authorities. Journals, pamphlets, and newspapers disseminated ideas on constitutional governance, civil liberties, and national unity. Legal theorists debated codification, administrative law, and the rights of citizens within sovereign states. Political clubs and informal assemblies, while suppressed, facilitated networking and information exchange, maintaining momentum for reformist agendas. Although immediate political success was limited, these developments cultivated a politically literate public that would continue to influence the trajectory of German unification. By mid-1849, the combination of elite resistance, military suppression, and diplomatic inertia effectively ended the revolutionary period. The German Confederation, under Austrian and Prussian guidance, reasserted control. Constitutions enacted during revolutionary uprisings were rescinded or modified to strengthen monarchical authority. Civic freedoms previously granted under revolutionary pressure were curtailed. Yet the experience had demonstrated the feasibility of pan-German deliberation, the potential for constitutional frameworks, and the practical challenges associated with reconciling state sovereignty with national unity. The period 1848 to 1849 also clarified strategic realities for unification. Austria's opposition to inclusive German nationalism highlighted the limitations of the Großdeutschland model. Prussia, with its stronger administrative capacity, military strength, and growing economic influence through the Zollverein, emerged as the likely nucleus for a future Klein-Deutschland solution. The experiences of the Frankfurt Assembly revealed that unification required not merely intellectual agreement or popular agitation, but the practical capacity of a dominant state to enforce and coordinate integration across multiple polities. Furthermore, it became evident that social, economic, and political reforms had to be synchronized with state power to ensure durability. Military realities remained central. Prussia's reformed army, organized under the Krumper system and other mid-19th century innovations, retained a professional corps capable of rapid mobilization. Austria, maintaining significant forces within its territories, could exert influence but faced limitations due to its multi-ethnic composition and broader imperial commitments. Smaller states lacked the capacity to resist or implement sustained national programs independently. Consequently, any future unification would require the alignment of military strength with political strategy, as the events of 1848 to 1849 had demonstrated. The revolutionary period further reinforced the role of public opinion, intellectual debate, and civic engagement in shaping national trajectories. Although direct political action failed, the circulation of ideas, the organization of representative assemblies, and the documentation of political theory created enduring reference points for subsequent leaders and policymakers. Nationalist organizations, even after suppression, maintained networks of communication across state boundaries, facilitating information exchange and coordination that would later influence strategy under the leadership of states such as Prussia. By the end of the revolutionary wave, German nationalism had evolved from primarily cultural and intellectual discourse into a politically actionable framework. Debates over constitutional design, federal structure, monarchical authority, suffrage, and civil rights had provided a foundation for systematic planning. These discussions, while temporarily sidelined by conservative reaction, set the stage for the eventual unification processes led by Prussia in the 1860s and 1870s. The 1848 to 1849 period demonstrated both the possibilities and limitations of liberal nationalist movements, highlighting the need for coordination between political ideas, state power, and economic infrastructure in achieving national unification. Following the failure of the 1848 revolutions, the German states entered a period of political consolidation and strategic recalibration. Although liberal uprisings had been suppressed, the underlying tensions regarding unification, governance, and leadership within Germany persisted. The conflict between Austria and Prussia, two dominant German powers, intensified in the 1850s, shaping both the economic and political landscape. This period was defined by competing visions for the future of Germany, the reassertion of conservative authority, and the incremental positioning of Prussia as a central force in eventual unification. Austria, under Prince Clemens von Metternich before his resignation in 1848, had historically emphasized a conservative order within Germany, seeking to maintain the German Confederation as a loose framework dominated by Habsburg influence. Metternich's resignation, prompted by the revolutionary upheavals, created a transitional period during which Austrian influence was temporarily weakened. Nevertheless, the Austrian Empire, under Emperor Franz Joseph I, continued to exert authority through diplomatic channels, military capability, and strategic alliances. Austria's vision for Germany, often referred to as the Großdeutschland model, emphasized the inclusion of all German-speaking lands, including the Austrian Empire itself. This model faced structural challenges because Austria's empire included significant non-German populations in Bohemia, Moravia, Hungary, and Galicia, complicating integration with other German states. Prussia, in contrast, had emerged from the 1848 revolutions with its administrative and military reforms largely intact. The Prussian state, having implemented legal, economic, and military modernization following the Napoleonic period, possessed a centralized bureaucracy capable of effective policy execution. Prussia's leadership envisioned a Klein-Deutschland model, advocating unification of German states under Prussian hegemony while excluding Austria. This approach addressed Austria's structural constraints and focused on consolidating northern and central German states around Prussia's economic, administrative, and military capacities. Prussian policymakers recognized that successful unification required a combination of strategic diplomacy, economic leverage, and military readiness. The 1850s saw incremental movements toward clarifying these competing visions. In the aftermath of the Frankfurt Assembly's failure, smaller German states sought stability within a conservative framework, often balancing Austrian and Prussian influence. The German Confederation's Bundestag, still located in Frankfurt, continued to convene delegates representing sovereign states. Austria maintained the presidency of the Diet, allowing it to influence legislative discussions and mediate disputes among member states. However, the lack of a permanent executive authority limited the Confederation's effectiveness, leaving room for Prussia to expand its influence through informal coordination, economic agreements, and bilateral treaties. Diplomatic tensions characterized the period. Austria sought to reassert control over southern and central German states, particularly those with historical ties to the Habsburg dynasty. Bavaria, Württemberg, Baden, and Saxony were carefully courted through treaties, dynastic marriages, and the promise of security against external threats. Prussia, conversely, cultivated alliances with northern and western German states through trade arrangements, infrastructure cooperation, and military preparedness. This competition created a dual structure within the German Confederation, wherein states aligned pragmatically with one dominant power while formally maintaining sovereignty under the Confederation. Economic developments during the 1850s further delineated spheres of influence. The Zollverein, initiated under Prussian leadership in 1834, had expanded to include most northern and central German states, excluding Austria. By the 1850s, the Union had created a significant integrated economic zone, standardizing internal trade, weights, and measures. Prussia leveraged the Zollverein to consolidate economic dependency among member states, using trade agreements, infrastructure investment, and administrative oversight as instruments of influence. Austria's exclusion from the Zollverein limited its capacity to exert similar economic control, reinforcing the structural advantage of Prussia in northern and central Germany. Austrian policymakers recognized the strategic significance of the Zollverein, but lacked the capacity or political will to establish a parallel system encompassing southern and western German states. Prussia's domestic policies reinforced its external influence. Administrative reforms, tax rationalization, and standardized legal codes created an efficient governance framework capable of coordinating interstate economic and military initiatives. Military organization remained a key strategic advantage. The Krumper system, introduced in the early 19th century, allowed Prussia to maintain a trained professional army while efficiently managing manpower and costs. By the mid-1850s, the Prussian military was capable of rapid mobilization, superior organization, and effective command structures, positioning the state for potential conflict with Austria or other German states resistant to Prussian leadership. Austria, while maintaining substantial military capability, faced challenges related to its multi-ethnic empire and the necessity of allocating resources across diverse territories. The Austrian army included significant contingents from non-German regions, requiring careful management of loyalty, training, and operational cohesion. Austria's economic system, less integrated than Prussia's Zollverein-based model, limited the capacity to leverage economic incentives in Germany. Nevertheless, Austria retained prestige, dynastic legitimacy, and influence within the Confederation, allowing it to shape policy and block initiatives that threatened Habsburg dominance. The ideological dimension of Austrian-Prussian competition was reflected in debates over constitutional governance, civil rights, and representation. Austrian policy emphasized conservative, hierarchical control, with limited tolerance for liberal reforms. Monarchs and bureaucracies maintained extensive censorship, restrictions on assembly, and control over universities. Prussia, while also conservative, allowed incremental administrative modernization and was more receptive to integrating economic rationalization with selective legal and municipal reforms. These differences influenced perceptions among smaller German states, with some aligning pragmatically with Austria for protection against liberal agitation, while others oriented toward Prussia to benefit from economic integration and potential administrative efficiency. During the 1850s, a series of crises tested the balance of power. In 1850, the punctation of Olmütz illustrated Austria's capacity to compel Prussia to negotiate in the context of the Hesse-Kassel succession dispute. Prussia, which had considered asserting influence over Hesse, was forced to accept Austrian mediation, demonstrating that while Prussia had growing administrative and military capacity, Austria remained a decisive power when mobilized. The agreement reinforced Austria's role as arbiter in the Confederation, but also underscored the fragility of the conservative equilibrium. Prussia's leadership, while temporarily constrained, continued to develop structural advantages that would facilitate later unification under its authority. Prussia's military reforms during the 1850s further strengthened its position. Modernized artillery, improved logistics, and staff organization enhanced operational capacity. The army maintained disciplined training standards, efficient reserve systems, and tactical doctrines that emphasized rapid mobilization and effective coordination among corps. These capabilities contrasted with the Austrian army, whose operational effectiveness was occasionally hindered by regional fragmentation and multi-ethnic composition. The combination of administrative efficiency and military readiness positioned Prussia to exploit future political openings in pursuit of unification. Infrastructure developments also reinforced the strategic landscape. Railroads expanded rapidly in Prussia and northern German states, facilitating troop movements, trade, and communication. By the early 1860s, a growing network of rail lines connected industrial centers, commercial hubs, and military garrisons. Telegraph systems complemented physical infrastructure, improving coordination between state authorities and military commands. Austria, constrained by geography, economic priorities, and imperial commitments, was slower to develop equivalent networks within German territories, limiting its operational flexibility relative to Prussia. Diplomatic efforts continued to reflect the competing visions of unification. Austria advocated a broadly inclusive German structure under Habsburg leadership, emphasizing legal recognition of the Confederation, dynastic legitimacy, and conservative stability. Prussia pursued incremental influence through economic and military leverage, encouraging alignment among northern and central states. Smaller states evaluated alliances based on strategic necessity, economic benefit, and the relative strength of Austria and Prussia. This dynamic produced a delicate equilibrium in which both powers sought to extend influence without provoking confrontation, while positioning themselves for potential opportunities arising from future crises or failures in governance. Public and intellectual discourse also contributed to the strategic environment. Nationalist publications, academic studies, and political commentaries continued to circulate among urban populations and university communities. While overt revolutionary activity had been suppressed, liberal and nationalist ideas persisted in journals, pamphlets, and societies. These ideas emphasized the potential benefits of unification, the legitimacy of constitutional governance, and the economic advantages of coordinated policy. Austria sought to suppress or marginalize these discourses, emphasizing loyalty to the monarchy and the Confederation, whereas Prussia tolerated moderated debate and selectively incorporated reformist measures into its administrative framework. This differential approach gradually enhanced Prussia's attractiveness as a leader among states seeking stability without stagnation. The period also witnessed continued attention to economic policy. The Zollverein expanded in scope and effectiveness during the 1850s, with additional states joining and internal administration improving. Prussia coordinated tariff schedules, customs procedures, and regulatory compliance to maximize efficiency. Infrastructure investments, including roads, canals, and ports, were increasingly aligned with the Union's objectives. Austria's non-participation in the Zollverein limited its capacity to leverage similar economic instruments, reducing its influence over member states. Economic dependency increasingly reinforced Prussia's leadership and created incentives for smaller states to align with Prussian policy initiatives. Internal political developments within Prussia and Austria reflected differing approaches to governance and reform. In Prussia, monarchs and bureaucrats implemented selective modernization of administration, taxation, and military organization, while preserving monarchical authority. In Austria, the Habsburg administration emphasized conservative control, dynastic legitimacy, and suppression of dissent. Both powers faced pressures from intellectual and economic elites, but Prussia's administrative flexibility and integration of economic policy into statecraft enhanced its capacity to influence German affairs incrementally. Austria maintained prestige and structural dominance within the Confederation but lacked comparable leverage in practical coordination and economic integration. By 1862, the cumulative effect of economic, military, administrative, and diplomatic developments had created a clear divergence between Austrian and Prussian visions for Germany. Austria retained the formal conservative prerogatives of the Confederation, exercised influence over southern German states, and maintained a multi-ethnic empire. Prussia, through the Zollverein, infrastructure investments, and incremental political reform, had established effective leadership among northern and central German states. The structural advantages accumulated over the preceding decades set the stage for decisive strategic actions that would ultimately determine the path of German unification, foreshadowing the role of Prussia under Otto von Bismarck's leadership in the subsequent decade. In September 1862, Otto von Bismarck was appointed Minister-President of Prussia, marking a pivotal moment in the trajectory of German unification. Bismarck, born in 1815 into a Junker family in Skanhausen, had previously served in the Prussian diplomatic corps, gaining experience in European capitals including Frankfurt, Paris, and St. Petersburg. His background combined aristocratic privilege, practical political exposure, and a comprehensive understanding of the structural weaknesses and opportunities within both the German Confederation and broader European geopolitics. Upon assuming office, Bismarck articulated a strategy centered on Realpolitik, a pragmatic approach emphasizing power, strategic alliances, and state interests rather than ideological or parliamentary considerations. This approach would define the next phase of German unification. The immediate political context in 1862 involved unresolved tensions between Prussia and Austria, the fractured nature of the German Confederation, and internal resistance within Prussia to administrative and military reforms. The Prussian parliament, particularly the liberal majority in the lower house, opposed proposals for expanding military expenditure, seeking instead constitutional constraints on the monarchy and fiscal accountability. Bismarck, emphasizing the necessity of a strong, prepared state, rejected liberal opposition to military reform, asserting that practical measures to strengthen the army and infrastructure were essential for both defense and future unification initiatives. This stance positioned Prussia for strategic flexibility while creating domestic political friction that Bismarck managed through a combination of legal interpretation, bureaucratic authority, and negotiation with loyalist factions. Bismarck's Realpolitik approach integrated military readiness, diplomatic initiative, and economic leverage as instruments of state policy. Recognizing that Prussia's position in northern and central Germany was strengthened by the Zollverein, Bismarck utilized the customs union as a mechanism for consolidating influence. Economic alignment encouraged smaller states to coordinate policies with Prussia, providing both financial integration and administrative precedent for collective governance. Infrastructure expansion, including railways and telegraph networks, was accelerated to ensure rapid mobilization of troops, facilitate communication across territories, and enhance logistical efficiency. These measures established structural readiness for future conflicts that would determine the configuration of German unification. The first major test of Bismarck's strategy arose in relation to the Danish duchies of Schleswig and Holstein. These territories were historically linked to both Denmark and the German Confederation, creating a complex diplomatic and legal situation. The Danish government, under the constitutional monarchy established in 1849, sought to consolidate its control over Schleswig, moving toward integration with Denmark proper. This action violated prior international agreements, including the London Protocol of 1852, which had stipulated the maintenance of separate duchies under joint Danish-German administration. The situation presented an opportunity for Prussia to assert influence, defend German interests, and challenge Denmark in a manner that could enhance Prussia's leadership in northern Germany without immediately provoking Austria into confrontation. In 1864, Bismarck engineered a diplomatic and military response through coordinated action with Austria. Prussia and Austria entered into a military alliance, agreeing to act jointly against Denmark to defend the interests of the German Confederation in Schleswig and Holstein. The military campaign, known as the Second Schleswig War, commenced in February 1864. Prussian forces, under the command of General Friedrich Graf von Wrangel and later General Eduard Vogel von Falkenstein, executed coordinated maneuvers in Schleswig, utilizing modernized infantry, artillery, and logistics. Austrian forces operated in Holstein, reflecting the agreed division of responsibility. Coordination between the two armies was facilitated by shared objectives, but remained limited in scope, reflecting both operational considerations and underlying rivalry. The war itself proceeded with relative rapidity. Prussian forces advanced through Schleswig, securing key towns and fortifications. The Battle of Dibbel, April 7 to 18, 1864, was particularly decisive, demonstrating Prussia's effective deployment of artillery and disciplined infantry tactics. Austrian forces simultaneously engaged Danish positions in Holstein, contributing to the overall strategic success. The Danish army, despite determined resistance, was unable to match the combined strength of the Allied German forces. By October 30th, 1864, the war concluded with the Treaty of Vienna, which allocated Schleswig to Prussia and Holstein to Austria. The arrangement reflected both the military outcome and diplomatic negotiation, balancing the immediate territorial acquisitions with broader considerations of German power dynamics. While the military campaign achieved its immediate objectives, the post-war arrangements introduced latent tensions between Austria and Prussia. The division of Schleswig and Holstein created a dual administration in which both powers exercised authority over separate territories that were, in practice, contiguous and interdependent. Austria's control over Holstein provided it with a foothold in northern Germany, while Prussia's acquisition of Schleswig reinforced its strategic position along the Jutland Peninsula. Bismarck recognized that this configuration was unstable and would necessitate careful diplomatic maneuvering to ensure that Prussia retained the initiative and Austria remained constrained. The conflict, therefore, achieved multiple strategic outcomes: demonstration of Prussian military effectiveness, territorial gain, and exposure of Austria's structural limitations in exercising authority over German territories. Bismarck's handling of the Schleswig-Holstein question demonstrated the interplay of military strategy and diplomacy central to Realpolitik. Negotiations with Austria maintained the appearance of cooperation, preserving the formal balance of power within the German Confederation. At the same time, Bismarck employed intelligence, negotiation with smaller German states, and careful management of international opinion to ensure that Prussia emerged with the greatest advantage. The post-war settlement allowed Prussia to consolidate control over Schleswig, implement administrative and military reforms, and strengthen infrastructure, thereby enhancing its capacity to project power in northern Germany. Austria's role, while significant in military contribution, was constrained diplomatically, illustrating the asymmetry in capabilities and strategic acumen between the two states. Economic considerations remained integral to Bismarck's strategy. The Zollverein facilitated coordination among northern German states, allowing Prussia to leverage economic dependency into political influence. Trade policies, tariff structures, and infrastructure projects were aligned with military objectives, ensuring that Prussia's economic position reinforced its strategic leverage. Investment in railways, including the Hamburg, Kiel, and Hamburg lines, enhanced the movement of troops and supplies, while telegraph lines enabled rapid communication and coordination across multiple territories. Industrial production, particularly in textiles, iron, and coal, was mobilized to support military requirements, demonstrating the interdependence of economic integration and strategic capability. The broader European diplomatic environment influenced Bismarck's decisions. France, under Emperor Napoleon III, observed developments in Schleswig and Holstein with interest, concerned about shifts in the balance of power in Northern Europe. Bismarck calibrated military action to avoid provoking French intervention while achieving Prussian objectives. Britain maintained a policy of neutrality but closely monitored developments due to its commercial and maritime interests in the region. Austria, preoccupied with internal administration and its multi-ethnic empire, was limited in its capacity to challenge Prussian initiatives. By managing these diplomatic variables, Bismarck ensured that Prussia's actions in Schleswig and Holstein enhanced its leadership position without triggering broader European conflict. Internal Prussian politics required careful navigation. The liberal-dominated Landtag, lower house, had resisted military expansion and budget increases. Bismarck utilized constitutional interpretation, executive authority, and negotiation with loyalist factions to secure funding for military campaigns and reforms. While domestic opposition remained, Bismarck's pragmatic approach emphasized outcomes over ideological alignment. The integration of administrative, military, and economic policy under his leadership demonstrated the principles of Realpolitik, whereby practical effectiveness and state interest guided decision-making rather than adherence to liberal or revolutionary ideals. The success in Schleswig and Holstein further enhanced Prussia's prestige among German states. Northern German states, observing Prussia's capability to achieve strategic objectives while managing Austria diplomatically, increasingly aligned their policies and military structures with Prussia. Administrative coordination, participation in the Zollverein, and bilateral treaties reinforced this alignment. Bismarck's strategy relied not only on military success, but on the perception of Prussian competence, reliability, and leadership capacity, creating conditions conducive to broader unification initiatives. Additionally, the experience highlighted the limitations of Austria in asserting authority over German affairs. Austria's divided attention between its non-German territories and internal administrative responsibilities constrained its capacity to exercise effective influence. While diplomatically and militarily competent, Austria lacked the integrated economic and administrative infrastructure that Prussia had developed through decades of reform and consolidation. This structural disparity informed Bismarck's long-term approach. Future unification efforts would require the exclusion of Austria from the German political framework to maximize Prussian leadership and operational coherence. The period 1862 to 1864 demonstrated several recurring patterns critical to understanding the later unification of Germany. First, military capability, administrative efficiency, and economic integration were mutually reinforcing, providing Prussia with leverage over smaller states and strategic autonomy relative to Austria. Second, diplomacy, carefully calibrated alliances, and the management of international opinion allowed Prussia to pursue aggressive objectives without triggering premature confrontation with other European powers. Third, domestic political management ensured that essential reforms and expenditures could be implemented despite opposition, emphasizing state capacity over parliamentary or ideological consensus. Finally, the Schleswig-Holstein experience underscored the importance of incremental territorial and administrative control. By acquiring Schleswig and coordinating with Austria over Holstein, Prussia demonstrated the feasibility of expanding influence through measured, pragmatic actions rather than revolutionary upheaval. Bismarck's manipulation of circumstances combined with effective military execution and diplomatic management provided a practical template for subsequent campaigns that would culminate in the Austro-Prussian War, the consolidation of northern German states, and the eventual unification of Germany under Prussian leadership. By the mid-1860s, the German states remained divided under the competing influence of Austria and Prussia. The Schleswig-Holstein arrangement following the 1864 war had created a temporary equilibrium, but it also exposed structural tensions in German affairs. Both Austria and Prussia exercised authority over separate duchies, with Prussia controlling Schleswig and Austria controlling Holstein. While this dual administration appeared cooperative, it contained latent conflicts over leadership and sovereignty in Germany. Bismarck recognized that this situation could not persist indefinitely if Prussia was to achieve unification under its leadership. Strategic planning during 1865 focused on creating conditions to assert Prussian dominance decisively over Austria and consolidate northern German states into a cohesive political and military entity. The underlying tensions stemmed from multiple sources. Austria, under Emperor Franz Joseph I, sought to maintain influence over German states through traditional mechanisms of the German Confederation, diplomatic negotiation, and the symbolic presidency of the Confederation's Bundestag in Frankfurt. Prussia, having strengthened its military, administrative, and economic capacities, was positioned to challenge Austria directly, exploiting structural advantages and leveraging the loyalty of northern German states aligned through the Zollverein and bilateral arrangements. Bismarck's objective was to engineer a conflict that would decisively settle the question of German leadership without unnecessarily provoking other European powers, particularly France and Britain, who could intervene if the war expanded beyond the German context. Tensions escalated through 1865. Disagreements over the administration of Schleswig and Holstein provided a pretext for asserting Prussian authority. Austria proposed a joint administration of the duchies, effectively giving both powers shared responsibility. Bismarck, asserting Prussia's preeminent role in northern Germany and citing administrative inefficiencies under dual control, refused to acquiesce. Through careful diplomatic maneuvering, he presented Prussia as a stabilizing force, capable of resolving disputes that Austria was unwilling or unable to manage efficiently. Prussia began mobilizing its military while negotiating with northern German states to secure their loyalty and participation in an anticipated conflict. The Prussian army, benefiting from reforms initiated in the 1850s and early 1860s, possessed significant operational advantages. The military had been organized under the Krumper system, ensuring a trained professional corps and a systematic reserve. Tactical doctrine emphasized rapid mobilization, effective coordination among corps, and the integration of artillery and infantry operations. Railways facilitated strategic troop movements, enabling Prussia to concentrate forces quickly at critical points along the border with Austrian territories and Allied German states. Artillery had been modernized, and logistical systems ensured consistent supply chains, while Prussian staff organization allowed for coordinated strategic planning across multiple theaters. Austria's army, while larger in absolute numbers, was constrained by its multi-ethnic composition, administrative bureaucracy, and slower mobilization, limiting operational flexibility. Diplomacy before the conflict was crucial. Bismarck cultivated alliances and neutrality agreements to isolate Austria and prevent broader intervention. He ensured that southern German states, such as Bavaria, Württemberg, Baden, and Hesse-Darmstadt, would remain neutral or non-committal during the initial conflict, avoiding escalation. He also communicated with France and Britain to mitigate concerns over Prussia's intentions, framing potential military action as an internal German dispute rather than aggressive expansion. By combining military preparedness with careful diplomatic isolation of Austria, Bismarck ensured that Prussia could act decisively with minimal external interference. The Austro-Prussian War, also known as the 7 Weeks' War, began in June 1866. Prussia's initial operations focused on the deployment of forces into northern and central German theaters, particularly in Saxony, Bohemia, and along the Elbe River. Coordination with allied northern German states ensured secure supply lines and political alignment. The initial engagements involved Prussian forces confronting Austrian contingents in strategic positions, testing operational readiness, and identifying weaknesses in Austrian command and coordination. Early maneuvers emphasized rapid advancement, concentration of forces at decisive points, and exploitation of intelligence gathered on Austrian troop deployments. The decisive engagement occurred at Königgrätz, Zadova, on July 3, 1866. The Prussian army, commanded by King Wilhelm I and Chief of Staff Helmuth von Moltke, engaged the Austrian army under Field Marshal Ludwig von Benedek. Prussian forces utilized superior coordination, the effective deployment of breech-loading rifles, and concentrated artillery to overwhelm Austrian positions. The use of railways for troop reinforcement allowed Prussia to bring additional corps into the battlefield more rapidly than Austria could respond. Austrian forces, despite numerical strength and traditional battlefield experience, were unable to achieve effective concentration and coordination, resulting in a decisive Prussian victory. The Battle of Königgrätz demonstrated the operational advantages of Prussia's military reforms, highlighting strategic mobility, communication, and integration of modern weaponry. Following Königgrätz, Austrian forces retreated, and Prussia continued offensive operations in Bohemia, Saxony, and along the Elbe. Austrian resistance was sporadic, with localized engagements failing to alter the strategic situation. Bismarck, controlling the political dimension of the conflict, emphasized the objective of limiting Austrian influence in German affairs rather than pursuing punitive territorial annexation. This approach ensured that Austria's power was curtailed while avoiding prolonged warfare, minimizing disruption to neighboring states, and preserving the potential for future diplomatic agreements. The war formally concluded with the Peace of Prague, signed on August 23, 1866. Key provisions included the dissolution of the German Confederation, Austria's exclusion from German affairs, and Prussia's recognition as the dominant German power. Austria retained internal sovereignty over its empire, including non-German territories, but relinquished political influence in northern and central Germany. Prussia annexed several northern German states, including Hanover, Hesse-Kassel, Nassau, and Frankfurt, consolidating territorial control and creating administrative continuity for subsequent unification efforts. Other northern states, such as Saxony, retained sovereignty but entered into alliances and administrative coordination with Prussia, reinforcing the Klein-Deutschland model under Prussian leadership. The dissolution of the German Confederation represented a structural transformation of Central Europe. The absence of a formal overarching institution allowed Prussia to establish a new framework of governance and coordination among northern German states. The North German Confederation, formed in 1867, institutionalized this structure. It comprised Prussia and the majority of northern German states, including Mecklenburg-Schwerin, Mecklenburg-Strelitz, Oldenburg, Brunswick, and several smaller principalities. The Confederation established a federal constitution, defining the division of powers between the central authority and constituent states. Military integration ensured that a unified command could be exercised under Prussian leadership, while economic policies aligned with the Zollverein's framework facilitated trade, standardization, and fiscal coordination. The North German Confederation implemented a bicameral legislative system, with a Bundesrat representing constituent states and a Reichstag elected through universal male suffrage. The constitution vested executive authority in the Prussian king, who served as Bundespräsidium, controlling foreign policy, military affairs, and central administration. States retained autonomy over local administration, legal codes, and certain internal policies, creating a balance between centralized authority and regional sovereignty. This structure reflected Bismarck's strategic vision. It provided the administrative and legal foundation for unification while maintaining cooperation with constituent states and avoiding the overextension of Prussian authority that could provoke resistance. Military organization within the North German Confederation was standardized. Prussia assumed leadership of the Confederation Army, integrating the forces of member states into a unified command. Standardized training, equipment, and organizational doctrine facilitated coordinated action, enabling rapid mobilization and efficient command structures. Conscription and reserve systems were harmonized, ensuring that forces could be reinforced systematically. This integration provided the North German Confederation with a credible military capability, both for defense against external threats and for eventual operations aimed at consolidating the southern German states into a fully unified Germany. Economic and fiscal integration reinforced political cohesion. The Zollverein served as the foundation for common trade policies, tariff regulations, and currency standardization. Prussia's administrative apparatus coordinated customs enforcement, infrastructure investment, and commercial regulation across the Confederation. Rail networks, telegraph lines, and river transport were aligned to support economic exchange and military logistics. These measures created interdependence among member states, reducing the likelihood of unilateral defection and facilitating coordinated policy implementation under Prussian leadership. The formation of the North German Confederation also clarified the structural limitations and strategic position of Austria. Excluded from the Confederation, Austria retained influence in southern German states through dynastic ties and informal alliances, but lacked formal authority over northern German affairs. This exclusion significantly reduced Austria's capacity to interfere in Prussia's leadership of Germany. Austria's retention of multi-ethnic territories within its empire maintained internal complexity and administrative focus, limiting its ability to project power effectively into northern and central Germany. The Peace of Prague and subsequent formation of the North German Confederation thus established a clear realignment of power within German-speaking Europe. Southern German states, including Bavaria, Württemberg, Baden, and Hesse-Darmstadt, remained formally independent but were influenced through diplomatic arrangements and military alliances with Prussia. These states entered defensive treaties with the North German Confederation, ensuring military cooperation while retaining sovereignty in peacetime. Bismarck's strategy emphasized gradual alignment rather than immediate absorption, creating conditions for later unification without provoking armed conflict or popular opposition. This careful balancing of autonomy and integration reflected the strategic application of Realpolitik in consolidating political authority. International reactions to the Austro-Prussian War and the establishment of the North German Confederation were closely monitored. France, under Napoleon III, recognized Prussia's strengthened position but was constrained from direct intervention by diplomatic prudence and domestic priorities. Britain maintained a policy of non-intervention, observing the reconfiguration of Central European power. Austria, while diplomatically humiliated, retained sovereignty and strategic options outside northern Germany. The European balance of power was recalibrated, with Prussia emerging as the dominant German state and Austria limited to influence outside the new Confederation framework. The North German Confederation also codified legal and administrative reforms consistent with Prussian models. Civil codes, judicial structures, and local governance were harmonized across member states. Administrative centralization enabled efficient policy implementation while preserving regional traditions. Economic regulation, including tariffs, trade facilitation, and infrastructure management, reinforced cohesion and fiscal stability. Military standardization ensured operational readiness and reinforced political unity, creating a robust framework capable of integrating southern German states in future consolidation efforts. Bismarck's strategy during this period demonstrated the integration of military capability, diplomatic skill, and administrative foresight. By decisively defeating Austria in a controlled conflict, securing northern German states through alliances and integration, and establishing institutional frameworks for governance, Bismarck created the structural conditions for eventual full unification. The exclusion of Austria, the consolidation of military and economic power, and the careful balance of autonomy and central authority by 1870, the North German Confederation, established under Prussian leadership in 1867, represented a significant restructuring of northern Germany, consolidating Prussia's military, political, and economic influence. The southern German states, Bavaria, Württemberg, Baden, and Hesse-Darmstadt, remained formally independent but had entered defensive and military treaties with the Confederation. While this arrangement maintained regional sovereignty, it left the southern states aligned with Prussia in the event of conflict, creating the potential framework for full unification. The period leading up to the Franco-Prussian War was characterized by strategic positioning, diplomatic maneuvering, and an ongoing assessment of Austria's absence from German affairs, allowing Prussia to assert leadership without significant external opposition from other German powers. France, under Emperor Napoleon III, observed these developments with increasing concern. The expansion of Prussia's power in northern Germany, its military modernization, and its success in consolidating northern German states suggested the potential for a strong, unified German state on France's eastern border. The French government viewed Prussia's consolidation as a challenge to its own position as a continental power. In particular, the diplomatic relations regarding the Spanish throne created a flashpoint. Following the deposition of Queen Isabella II of Spain in 1868, the Spanish government sought a new monarch. Prince Leopold of Hohenzollern-Sigmaringen, a Catholic member of the extended Prussian royal family, was proposed as a candidate. France perceived the potential ascension of a Hohenzollern to the Spanish throne as a strategic threat, increasing the likelihood of encirclement by a German-led confederation and expanding Prussian influence across Western Europe. Diplomatic communications regarding the Hohenzollern candidacy escalated tensions in the summer of 1870. Bismarck maintained a formal stance of neutrality, indicating that Prussia would respect France's concerns and that Leopold had withdrawn his candidacy. However, Bismarck edited and selectively released the EMS dispatch on July 13, 1870, presenting it as a provocative refusal by the Prussian king to meet French demands in a confrontational tone. This manipulation of diplomatic correspondence inflamed public opinion in France, portraying Prussia as dismissive of French prestige, while simultaneously rallying support for Prussia within Germany. The release of the dispatch precipitated a diplomatic crisis, with France perceiving a direct insult and declaring war on Prussia on July 19, 1870. The declaration of war initiated the Franco-Prussian War, a conflict that would determine the final structure of German unification. Prussia, as the leading state of the North German Confederation, immediately mobilized its forces. Military organization had been standardized across the Confederation. Northern German states integrated their armies with Prussia's command structure, employing consistent training, equipment, and operational doctrine. Mobilization was facilitated by extensive rail networks, enabling rapid concentration of troops along the French border in the Rhineland and Alsace-Lorraine regions. Prussian logistical preparation, supply chains, and telegraph communications provided operational advantages, ensuring coordinated movements and rapid response to French deployments. French military forces, under Emperor Napoleon III and Chief of Staff Marshal Patrice de MacMahon, initially adopted conventional defensive positions along the frontier. France had traditionally relied on fortifications and numerical superiority, expecting to leverage strategic depth and defensive terrain to counter German advances. However, coordination between the French army and political leadership was complicated by internal disagreements regarding mobilization, strategic priorities, and operational command. French forces faced logistical limitations, inconsistent training among reserve units, and slower mobilization compared to the Prussian-led Confederation. These factors would prove decisive as the conflict unfolded. Prussian strategy emphasized rapid, decisive engagement to prevent protracted warfare. Following mobilization, Prussian forces advanced into Alsace-Lorraine, seeking to engage French armies before they could consolidate fully. The initial battles, including engagements at Wissembourg and Worth, demonstrated the effectiveness of Prussian organization and artillery deployment. Superior coordination allowed Prussian forces to concentrate at key points, achieving local superiority despite numerical parity in some theaters. French attempts to maneuver and counterattack were impeded by slower mobilization and fragmented command structures. The war's most significant early engagement occurred at the Battle of Sedan on September 1, 1870. Prussian and North German Confederation forces, employing combined arms tactics integrating infantry, artillery, and cavalry, encircled the main French army commanded by Napoleon III. Prussian utilization of railroads, strategic reconnaissance, and coordinated flanking movements allowed for rapid concentration of forces and effective encirclement. The battle resulted in the surrender of approximately 100,000 French troops, including Emperor Napoleon III, who was captured along with senior officers. The defeat at Sedan marked the collapse of French field command and directly influenced subsequent political developments in France. Following the Sedan, the collapse of imperial authority in France led to the proclamation of the Third Republic in Paris. The new French government, under the leadership of the Government of National Defense, sought to continue resistance against Prussian advances, mobilizing remaining forces for defensive operations and local engagements. Prussian strategy, however, focused on strategic encirclement of key urban centers and siege operations rather than pursuing immediate annihilation of residual French forces. This approach allowed for the systematic reduction of resistance while maintaining the integrity of Prussian lines of communication and minimizing exposure to counterattack. The Siege of Metz, conducted from August 19 to October 27, 1870, was a key component of the Prussian campaign. French forces, numbering approximately 180,000, were encircled by Prussian and Allied forces, including contingents from the North German Confederation. Prussian forces established siege lines, artillery positions, and supply networks to maintain pressure and prevent breakout attempts. The siege demonstrated logistical competence, operational patience, and the effective use of coordinated military engineering. French forces eventually surrendered, further weakening the capacity for sustained resistance and facilitating subsequent Prussian operations toward Paris and southern France. Throughout the campaign, Prussian political leadership maintained coordination with southern German states. Defensive treaties were invoked to integrate Bavarian, Württemberg, and Badenese forces into the operational command, creating unified strategic planning while preserving nominal autonomy of the southern contingents. This integration provided additional manpower, ensured cohesive operational strategy across German states, and reinforced the perception of collective German effort, a factor that would facilitate political consolidation following military success. The war's operational phases continued with systematic advances into central France. Prussian forces, integrating mobilized contingents from northern and southern states, engaged in a series of battles, including Gravelotte, Saint-Privat, and Bonne-la-Rolande, securing territory and neutralizing residual French forces. Railroads, telegraphs, and supply depots allowed for sustained operational tempo, enabling simultaneous sieges and field operations. Coordination among corps, divisions, and supporting units demonstrated the advantages of standardized command structures and logistical preparedness, reflecting organizational lessons developed in prior Prussian conflicts, including the wars against Denmark and Austria. Siege operations in Paris began on September 19, 1870. Prussian forces established circumferential positions around the city, utilizing artillery bombardment, encirclement, and controlled supply line disruption. The prolonged siege involved continuous engagement, monitoring of defensive preparations, and containment of French attempts at breakout or relief. French efforts, including sorties and construction of fortifications, were systematically countered by Prussian coordination, intelligence gathering, and strategic deployment of resources. The siege demonstrated the effectiveness of integrated military, administrative, and logistical planning at the operational level. International reactions during the conflict remained constrained by diplomatic caution. Britain, maintaining neutrality, monitored the conflict and expressed interest in preserving European stability. Austria, diplomatically isolated, refrained from intervention, observing the consolidation of Prussian leadership without direct engagement. Russia and Italy maintained positions of neutrality, constrained by internal considerations and existing diplomatic arrangements. France, while attempting to mobilize remaining forces, was unable to secure external support sufficient to counter Prussian operations effectively. This diplomatic context allowed Prussia to focus on operational execution without significant risk of escalation into a broader European war. The military success of the Prussian-led forces facilitated political consolidation. Following the surrender of Paris in January 1871, Negotiations and coordination with southern German states accelerated. Bavaria, Württemberg, Baden, and Hesse-Darmstadt formally entered the North German Confederation framework, agreeing to integration under Prussian leadership while retaining local administration. Military command was unified, economic integration was expanded, and administrative coordination across previously independent territories was established. These arrangements reflected Bismarck's strategic vision of unification through incremental integration following military success. The formal unification of Germany was proclaimed on January 18, 1871, at the Palace of Versailles. King Wilhelm I of Prussia was declared German emperor, consolidating political authority over northern and southern German states within a federal structure. The new German Empire established constitutional, administrative, military, and economic frameworks encompassing the former North German Confederation and the newly integrated southern states. The emperor exercised executive authority, with centralized control over foreign policy, military command, and fiscal management, while constituent states retained limited autonomy in local governance, reflecting negotiated agreements and existing federal structures. Territorial adjustments included the annexation of Alsace and parts of Lorraine from France, formalized in the Treaty of Frankfurt, May 10, 1871. The incorporation of these territories reflected both strategic and economic considerations, including control over key industrial regions, defensive depth along the Rhine, and symbolic consolidation of German national territory. France was obligated to pay indemnities, further consolidating the economic and political position of the new German Empire. These arrangements established both internal cohesion and strategic advantage for Prussia-led Germany within Europe. The integration of southern German states under the new imperial structure was facilitated by existing treaties, military coordination, and administrative frameworks. Bavaria, Württemberg, Baden, and Hesse-Darmstadt maintained local governance over education, judicial administration, and internal policing while participating in unified military and foreign policy directives. The federal structure allowed for coherent national policy while respecting regional distinctiveness, providing a foundation for long-term political stability and central authority under the German emperor. Military and economic consolidation ensured the new German Empire possessed significant capacity for both defense and development. Standardized military organization, integrated rail and telegraph networks, and coordinated industrial production enabled rapid response to external threats and internal requirements. Economic integration extended the Zollverein framework, facilitating trade, fiscal management, and regulatory standardization across the expanded territory. Administrative centralization, judicial uniformity, and standardized legal codes reinforced cohesion and governance capacity, demonstrating the systematic application of prior Prussian models to a larger national context. Bismarck's strategy, combining diplomatic negotiation, military effectiveness, administrative foresight, and economic integration, achieved the objectives of unification while minimizing internal dissent and external interference. The Franco-Prussian War provided the catalyst for final unification, demonstrating the utility of sequential strategic planning, exploitation of military advantages, and calibrated diplomatic action. The structural, institutional, and operational frameworks established during this period ensured that the German Empire was cohesive, functional, and capable of exercising authority across a diverse set of constituent states. The unification of Germany in 1871 represented a decisive transformation of political, economic, and military structures within Central Europe. The newly established German Empire encompassed the previously fragmented northern and southern German states, integrating them into a federal system under the authority of the Prussian king, now titled German Emperor. The institutional, military, and administrative structures implemented during the unification process provided both the framework for centralized governance and mechanisms for maintaining cohesion among diverse states with distinct traditions, legal codes, and regional identities. This structural design ensured that the empire could function effectively while balancing the interests of constituent states, reflecting a pragmatic approach to national integration. The federal structure of the empire consisted of several key organs. The Bundesrat, or Federal Council, represented the individual states and exercised influence over legislation, particularly in areas affecting state prerogatives. Members were appointed by the governments of the constituent states, with voting power weighted in proportion to the relative size and significance of each state. Prussia, as the dominant member, held a majority within the Bundesrat, allowing it to guide policy direction while preserving the formal participation of smaller states. The Reichstag, an elected body representing citizens across the empire, provided a mechanism for legislative input through universal male suffrage. While the Reichstag possessed authority over fiscal and certain legislative matters, executive power remained concentrated in the hands of the emperor, enabling centralized decision-making in foreign policy, military command, and national administration. The Constitution of 1871 codified the powers and responsibilities of the federal government and constituent states. Military command was unified under the emperor, allowing for coordinated strategic planning and mobilization of forces across the empire. Prussia retained control over key ministerial offices, including foreign affairs and finance, reinforcing central authority. Individual states maintained jurisdiction over education, law enforcement, and local governance, providing continuity of regional administrative practices while participating in unified national objectives. This system facilitated the operational integration of the empire without eroding the legitimacy of local governments or provoking resistance among populations with distinct historical identities. Military integration was a central feature of the post-unification structure. Prussia's general staff system, developed under Helmuth von Moltke, extended its organizational, operational, and logistical frameworks across the German Empire. Southern German states contributed contingents that were trained and equipped to standardized specifications, enabling cohesive field operations. Strategic mobilization plans, developed in coordination with rail infrastructure and telegraph communications, allowed rapid concentration of forces in response to external threats. The integration of reserve systems, conscription regulations, and operational doctrine ensured that the empire possessed a credible and effective military capability, maintaining security and reinforcing the authority of the central government. Economic consolidation continued the work of the Zollverein, expanding standardized trade, tariff, and fiscal policies across the empire. The integration of southern German states into the economic framework facilitated intra-German trade, industrial coordination, and infrastructure development. Railroads, waterways, and telegraph systems were unified under coordinated planning, enabling efficient transport of goods, resources, and personnel. Fiscal policy, including taxation, currency standardization, and customs enforcement, provided consistent revenue streams and regulatory oversight. Industrial expansion, particularly in coal, iron, and steel production, supported both economic growth and military capacity, demonstrating the interdependence of economic integration and strategic preparedness. The unification process had profound effects on international relations and the balance of power in Europe. Prussia's elevation as the leading state within the German Empire shifted Central European dynamics, establishing a strong, cohesive power capable of influencing diplomatic, military, and economic developments on the continent. Austria's exclusion from German affairs preserved its influence over non-German territories but diminished its capacity to counter Prussian-led initiatives in the German heartland. France, having suffered territorial losses and the indemnity imposed by the Treaty of Frankfurt, experienced a decline in immediate continental influence, while the German Empire emerged as a structurally stable and strategically capable power. This recalibration of power influenced alliance patterns, defense planning, and diplomatic calculations across Europe, setting conditions that would endure through the late 19th century. The integration of political institutions across the German Empire reflected a careful balance between central authority and local autonomy. Judicial systems were standardized, legal codes harmonized, and administrative practices aligned, facilitating coherence while accommodating regional variations. Local governance structures retained control over civil administration, education, and policing, ensuring continuity of established practices and minimizing potential sources of dissent. This dual approach provided legitimacy for centralized authority while promoting functional efficiency, illustrating the practical application of governance principles developed under Prussian leadership and adapted for a broader federal context. Cultural and linguistic cohesion reinforced the structural integration of the German Empire. While regional dialects and traditions persisted, the use of standardized German in administration, education, and military operations established a common medium for communication and policy implementation. National institutions, such as universities, technical schools, and research academies, promoted scientific, technical, and administrative expertise across the empire. Educational standardization supported literacy, professional development, and state capacity, ensuring that human resources were effectively aligned with the administrative, military, and economic needs of the empire. The unification of Germany also reflected the broader impact of nationalism in 19th century Europe. Popular and elite support for a cohesive German state, cultivated over decades through cultural, intellectual, and political movements, provided the social legitimacy necessary for political consolidation. Public perception of shared language, historical experience, and economic interdependence reinforced the rationale for integration under a single political framework. Bismarck's strategy leveraged these sentiments pragmatically, coordinating military victories, diplomatic negotiations, and administrative reforms to align with prevailing nationalist currents while avoiding revolutionary upheaval or excessive popular mobilization. Bismarck's application of Realpolitik during unification demonstrated the interplay of pragmatic statecraft, military strategy, and diplomatic management. He systematically manipulated circumstances to advance Prussian objectives. From Schleswig-Holstein through the Austro-Prussian War to the Franco-Prussian War, his policies combined military readiness, controlled escalation, and strategic alliance building. Bismarck's approach emphasized the alignment of outcomes with state interests, prioritizing operational effectiveness over ideological considerations. The resulting unification of Germany illustrates the capacity of pragmatic, calculated political action to achieve transformative national objectives without reliance on revolutionary or populist measures. The structural design of the German Empire provided a foundation for industrial, technological, and military development. Integration of northern and southern German states allowed coordinated investment in infrastructure, including rail networks, telegraphs, and roads, which facilitated internal commerce, resource distribution, and military mobility. Standardization of industrial production, particularly in coal, iron, and steel, supported economic expansion and strategic military requirements. Coordination between regional economies, supported by fiscal policy and customs regulation, enhanced productivity and created the conditions for sustained economic growth across the empire. The military reforms and integration implemented under the German Empire provided enduring strategic advantages. Unified command structures, standardized training and equipment, and coordinated mobilization plans enabled rapid response to external threats. The experience of prior conflicts against Denmark, Austria, and France established operational doctrine, logistical competence, and organizational models that informed ongoing military preparedness. The centralized authority vested in the emperor, supported by the general staff system, ensured strategic cohesion, operational flexibility, and effective administrative control over military resources. The political architecture of the German Empire reflected a sophisticated balance of federal and central authority. Prussia's dominance ensured consistency in foreign policy, military command, and fiscal management, while constituent states retained autonomy in local administration. Legislative structures, including the Bundesrat and Reichstag, institutionalized representation, negotiation, and consultation, providing mechanisms for governance without undermining central authority. This balance allowed the empire to function effectively across diverse territories and populations, providing both political stability and operational coherence. The unification process demonstrated the critical importance of economic integration in nation-building. The extension of Zollverein policies across southern states facilitated intra-German trade, standardized currency and tariffs, and created interdependent commercial networks. Industrial growth, infrastructure development, and coordinated fiscal policy reinforced political cohesion, illustrating the interrelation of economic, administrative, and military factors in consolidating national power. Economic integration provided both practical functionality and strategic leverage, supporting central authority while promoting collective prosperity across constituent states. Diplomatic implications of the unification extended beyond Germany. European powers recalibrated their strategies in response to the emergence of a strong, unified German state. France's defeat and territorial losses diminished its capacity for unilateral continental action. Austria's exclusion from German affairs limited its influence in Central Europe, reinforcing the dominance of Prussia-led Germany. Britain, maintaining traditional maritime and commercial interests, observed continental realignment, while Russia and other powers assessed the implications for balance of power calculations. The new German Empire entered the international system as a major state, capable of influencing regional and continental dynamics through both military and economic strength. The consolidation of Germany under Prussian leadership also influenced subsequent political and social developments within the empire. Administrative centralization, military integration, and economic coordination created conditions for sustained governance and policy implementation. Standardized education, legal systems, and civil administration provided frameworks for coherent state activity. Coordination of military and civil infrastructure facilitated both domestic stability and international strategic projection. These institutional arrangements ensured that the German Empire could function effectively as a unified state while accommodating regional diversity and historical legacies. In terms of historical significance, the unification of Germany established a model of nation-state formation combining military success, diplomatic negotiation, economic integration, and administrative centralization. The process demonstrated the potential for pragmatic, sequential action to achieve national consolidation without reliance on revolutionary or popular upheaval. Integration of diverse territories under federal structures, alignment of constituent state interests with central authority, and systematic development of military, economic, and administrative capacities provided a durable foundation for national stability and strategic capability. The German Empire emerged as a cohesive political entity with structural, institutional, and operational frameworks capable of sustaining sovereignty, economic development, and military effectiveness within a competitive European environment. The unification also highlighted the interplay between leadership, institutional development, and structural conditions. Bismarck's strategic management, leveraging military capabilities, economic cohesion, and political alignment, achieved results consistent with Prussia's long-term objectives. Constituent states, while retaining autonomy, were integrated into a coordinated system of governance, reflecting pragmatic adaptation of federal principles. Economic networks, military structures, and administrative institutions provided resilience and functionality, ensuring the effectiveness of the new political entity. The German Empire exemplified a model in which deliberate, calculated statecraft, combined with structural integration and institutional capacity, resulted in the successful consolidation of a previously fragmented set of territories.